To go more in depth on what is happening between Israel and Hamas, we're pleased to be joined by Lisa Ruth, former CIA analyst, current analyst for LigNet. As always, Lisa, thank you so much for spending some time with us in studio here on America's Forum.
Pleasure to be here.
Give us your assessment of what is transpiring right now between Israel and Hamas.
Well, in addition, we've got the airstrikes now, as you know, and as you discussed earlier today, Hamas rejected this ceasefire proposal by Egypt. I think what's going on is we're now in the real negotiating process. Hamas wants better terms, and what they really want is the border opened, the border that Egypt and Israel are controlling. Hamas also wants these prisoners released, which it's unlikely Israel's going to concede on. However, the border is a big issue. Shutting down the border is deathly to Hamas. It's cut off their economy, and that's what they're really holding out for at this point.
It was interesting yesterday, Deputy Defense Minister Danny Danon joined us here, and he mentioned in passing, although it attracted a lot of attention at our parent website, Newsmax.com, he mentioned that Israel actually supplies the power for Hamas and those living in that region. And he has suggested that with each attack from Hamas, Tel Aviv should cut the power to that region.
Well, certainly as we're ratcheting up, I think we're going to see more of those creative options, if you will. The other issue, and we discussed it last time I was on, Israel is considering a ground invasion, and they did do a small invasion last week where they sent in commandos. And I think you're going to see more of those kinds of attacks. The cutting off the power, the cutting off the border, there's a lot of power, I was going to say soft power, but that's inaccurate. A lot of different kinds of hard power that Israel can use, in addition to the rocket strikes, the airstrikes that are going in right now. It's going to become extremely difficult in Gaza.
Now, yesterday also we were greeted with news that the Israelis shot down a drone. You take a look at drone technology and the boasts of Iran and others in the region. Is it likely that Hamas got its drone from Iran?
Looking at it, let's take the analysis here. We know Hamas, we've seen over the last couple of days, long-range rockets from Iran that Hamas has. We now have the drone situation. Taking a bet here, it sure looks like Iran is at least cooperating with Hamas in this particular conflict, providing probably drones, rockets. And there's even out there the question of, is this strategy even part of an Iran strategy? Did Iran encourage Hamas to launch these rockets to increase instability in the region?
Because as this crisis continues between Israel and Hamas, there are those talks going on in Vienna with a July 20th deadline. With that in mind, we see Secretary Kerry in this administration being, some would say flexible, others would say just indulgent of the Iranian point of view. Assess what is going on right now there in those talks and what may happen.
Looking at that, you're exactly right. What we've seen since the beginning of these talks happened was the U.S. delegation, the international delegation, if you will, taking a fairly soft line. It seems that the Western powers want a deal and are almost willing to concede, maybe not anything, but on a lot of points to get it. You know, you also, I'm sure, saw Kerry decided not to go to the Middle East after the talks. He chose not to go to address these issues. That's an interesting development as well. The Iranian deal is important to the West, and I think we're going to see it moving forward, again, for lack of a better term, but I think there's a lot of issues there that are not favorable and that raise concerns.
As we understand the dynamics right now, or the discussion in Vienna, centers around the number of centrifuges that the Iranians have. And apparently they are in the hundreds of thousands. And the West is asking for a reduction to around 6,500, I guess. But the Israeli position is, hey, we don't want the Iranians to have any of these things. With that in mind, is it likely that when July 20th comes, we'll see the diplomatic equivalent of a punt? They'll extend talks beyond a deadline of July 20th?
I think that's an absolute possibility, a very high possibility. Again, going back to, they're coming to the table. Everybody wants a deal. So, you know, it's sort of like the ceasefire talks in Gaza. It's not really solving the problem, but it's extending it and allowing it to continue. You know, the issues Iran is also a trust issue. Iran keeps saying, sure, we'll play with you guys, but there's a lot of questions still surrounding what they're willing to do. But at this point, the West is willing to allow them, using your words, to punt on this and to say, okay, well, we'll talk about that later. But I don't think the 20th is going to come and go and we're going to go, okay, that's it, we're done. I think we're going to see a continuation.
You mentioned earlier the geopolitical implications, perhaps the notion that Iran may have invited Hamas to stir up trouble with the Israelis while these talks are going on. Now, in terms of the Israeli response to the possibility of Iranian nukes, the Israelis don't seem like they're going to abide by any presence of nuclear weapons in Iran.
And certainly in the past, as we know, Israel has come down hard and said, no negotiation on this. We're not bending. And that position is unlikely to change. And in fact, it's going to become hardened with the Hamas situation.
Let me double back in diplomacy, back to the original concept, which was the offer of the ceasefire or the proposed ceasefire by Egypt's new president. Tell us more about al-Sisi and what he may be up to in terms of the role of Egypt in trying to broker a ceasefire.
Egypt brokered the last ceasefire, but that was under Mohamed Morsi, who was certainly not only a member of the Brotherhood, but had strong ties to Hamas. Sisi has clamped down on the Muslim Brotherhood, and his ties with Hamas are tense at best. But again, Egypt controls this border with Israel. Egypt almost has to be a part of it because otherwise the border is not going to open. Sisi, what he said was, let's have a ceasefire, let's have talks, and we'll kind of go from there. Now, this wasn't a long-term solution, but it was an immediate end to the fighting. And Hamas said no. They said this brings us to our knees. It's not worth the paper it's written on. But for Egypt, they are a natural negotiator in this process just because of their proximity and their role.
Well, we understand the Israeli insistence, just as we talked about no nukes for Iran, the Israelis are saying no more rockets for Hamas. Is that a likely scenario?
In terms of launching them
well,
from?
in terms of a ceasefire, they're saying get rid of the stockpiles of rockets.
Yeah, Hamas, and again, you've got this situation where, of course, Israel's going to not only say get rid of the rockets, but they're taking action to get rid of the rockets. They're targeting them. That was the ground assault we talked about. Hamas has shown no indication of willingness to concede that, nor do I anticipate that they will. They are not interested in giving that up. They believe they need that for their own protection. That's not going to be a point that Hamas will agree to.
And of course, given the proximity of these nations geopolitically on the other side of the world, there are all sorts of questions about their border security, but that brings us back home to the raging debate going on here in the United States about our southern border and about our immigration policy. We had General Kelly of Southern Command say that the border, our southern border, is the major existential threat to the United States right now. Would you go that far?
I would say that there are incredible vulnerabilities there. And bringing back to Hamas, our friends in Hamas, Hezbollah, Hamas are very active in Latin America. They are almost certainly taking advantage of the vulnerable trade routes, the trade in people routes that are coming through the border. It is moreover likely that other terrorists see this as an opportunity. I think you cannot reasonably say that we're secure in any way on our southern border from terrorists, from cartels, from organized crime, from gangs, from anybody.
And just yesterday, a report from a Texas rancher that he picked up on his land an English Urdu dictionary, glossary, and his concern is that Pakistanis and others are using his own ranch to cross.
Sure, and again, these are routes that have been established for a very long time. Arms, weapons, drugs, now people come through. The sheer volume that we know are coming through means we're not catching people coming through. And terrorists, criminals, cartels are very nimble. They're going to use this. You mentioned the dictionary. I heard there was a prayer rug that was found, a Muslim prayer rug. There's no question that this is a vulnerability.
Lisa Ruth will have to end it right there, but for more in-depth analysis and forecasting on the crisis in the Mideast and on our own border situation, you can go to lignet.com. We'd love to get your comments on the stories we've been talking about this morning as we thank Lisa Ruth for her time. Here's where you can comment. Why don't you tweet us your remarks at Newsmax TV, # America's Forum. There's a new way for you to likewise register your comment at this address, newsmaxtv.com/comment. And don't forget Facebook. That's facebook.com/Newsmax, America's Forum, with a news update after this timeout.